It's great to be here and talk to you about trees. Thank you. It's a PDF. I don't know if that matters. But I don't need one if it doesn't open. I can talk away. Before we get going, is there anything people are interested related to trees, friends of trees, tree care, ecological history of the Willamette Valley?
So what's your criteria for trees that you provide? Is it mostly natives, or do you have a variety of trees that you're providing for folks?
It's a great question. It depends on where they are situated. So, and we're in checkerboard land, which complicates things, with county, city, and there's different regulations. And we have no funding on county land, but we have funding for public right-of-way on city land. The city just in the last 6 months said that they will not fund county planting as they have in the past for friends of trees. So, but if it's in the city of Eugene right-of-way, then the city of Eugene has a planting guideline document and has a approved street tree list that those are the only trees that we can offer planting.
Gotcha.
So that's one criteria. If it's on city of Eugene right of way, then we have to follow their rules for where the trees are sited, where they're located, and the actual species themselves. And it's changing. So for example, just in the last year, it's not on their approved street tree list, but all ashes are now prohibited. And so that's a changing thing. I occasionally ask for and given exemptions to plant trees that I advocate for, or most often I'm told no. On private land, we have no funding. Eugene and Springfield are I think two out of the 3 cities out of the 21 cities Friends of Trees works on that do not fund private land planting. And so we're really bummed about that. We've been pushing hard for 20 years with no luck. And so we hope things are changing, but you never know. And so on private land, because we have, I said no funding, but we actually got the UWeb Green Power grant, which is providing some funding for us to offer free trees to any low-income people in federally designated high equity neighborhoods, which when you go north of Beltline, this is not. South of Beltline, west of River Road, it is. So in Far West neighborhood, River Road neighborhood, Train Song, Bethel, I think Lower Churchill, that industrial corridor, what's the other industrial neighborhood that no one lives in? Anyway, in those neighborhoods, we could offer free trees to anyone 40 yards. Because our abilities are limited in yards, and actually we would do this whether they were or not, we want to offer, because it's what we believe in, and want to encourage trees that we perceive as more useful than other trees. So the primary reason that people get trees in their yards or in the street, the primary reason in my experience, and I've been talking to people about trees for more than 30 years, primary reason people want trees is for perceptions of ornamentality or aesthetic reasons. So for instance, I went to a client today who wanted a tree that would block her neighbor. 4 trees in a row, and she didn't want a hedge, but she wanted 4 trees planted on 4-foot spacings that would end up between 20 and 25 feet tall and were weird and twisted. Those were the criteria she asked me to work with, and
How'd it go? That's what you got.
And then she wanted Hollywood juniper was what she had looked at and decided she wanted, and so I went and looked at a Hollywood juniper in a nursery. But so just to back up a sec, I work at Friends of Trees full-time, and I work 15 hours a week for Sperry Tree Care. And I am starting my own tree nursery, so I have a bunch of different things going on. I worked a 12-and-a-half-hour day for Sperry Tree Care today, and then I changed out of my super dirty, gross clothes and put Friends of Trees gear on and put that hat on. So, did it not work at all?
Can you tell us what
I'm
is,
sorry about that.
Oh, I'm sorry.
what is Friends of Trees? 'Cause
So,
not everybody-
yeah.
Uh-huh.
So, Friends of Trees is a regional nonprofit whose mission is to bring people together to plant and care for trees. And so by care, that means what we conventionally call stewardship. Many of you know stewardship. If you really want to get into it, and when I did my master's on local food systems, I read a bunch of the 1800s and early 1900s documents and original newspapers and things like that about stewardship, extension publications, soil and water conservation publications, and stewardship comes from Christianity, and it means taking care of something that someone else owns, and that someone else is God, in traditional understanding of stewardship. And so the idea is that, as it says in the Bible, God loves their creation, and so humans have the responsibility to take care of it. That's where stewardship comes from. Not many people know that, but really it means to care for a place. So that's why I said Friends of Trees engages people to plant and care for trees. And so how we interpret stewardship is watering, weeding, and mulching and pruning primarily. And so Friends of Trees has a couple major programs. One is planting the street and yard trees. We call that our neighborhood trees program. And then we have a green space program doing not far from here. Our first planting of the year for Friends of Trees this year is a Saturday from 8:30 to 11:30 on Northwest Expressway. Last year we were over here in Santa Clara. It's our planting on Northwest Expressway, starting 10 years ago, but we actually did one in 2000, which is where the Veterans Homeless Camp is, just west of the Chambers Connector here off River Road. They were living in a forest we planted in 2000 in partnership with City of Eugene Neighborhoods program. So technically phase 11, but so in our green space program, we plant trees that are more natural areas, green spaces. And so all our volunteers come to the event. We expect about 40 volunteers to plant about 150 trees, shrubs, and native plants. And just because I never finished answering your question, I'm going to go back and say, for yard trees, we offer trees that we perceive to be useful, which often aren't conventionally aesthetic. And so what most people want, again, is a Japanese maple, a red maple, or a dogwood. And we try and focus on trees that we perceive to have benefits to humans, our local community, and the non-human community. And so we emphasize native plants, large canopy trees, because the benefits trees provide are related to a bunch of different things, but the primary one is their size. The larger the size, the more benefits that a tree provides. Most ornamental trees are small, and actually, I believe that that they're a net cost to nature. I think it's good for us to plant them because we engage each other and we develop habits and learning. But overall, if we were to count, if we're really to do ecological accounting, or they have these different terms for looking at different behaviors and things, and then measuring all the inputs and outputs. And they're probably not a net benefit. Under power line trees are an example of small trees like that. So we focus on native trees, food trees, and large canopy trees for and we throw in a couple ornamental trees. Otherwise we just go out of business. And so, you know, and just to stick to that for a second, I'll say we're in a time period, my background's in anthropology. We're in a background where we're in a culture that has the least knowledge of plants, horticulture, natural history of any humans that have ever lived in human history. So we're in this time period of almost no knowledge. Maybe 1 to 3% of us have significant knowledge of like plants, animals, making food, preserving food, things like that. It's almost gone. I'd say it probably bottomed out in the 70s or 80s, and then we hit bottom and are starting to rise up out of that. But it's going to take many generations to build a significant skill level among our populace that to have to do almost anything related to nature. Generations, really. And you don't build skills and connection and knowledge easily. And so I kind of see what we're doing, connecting people, as a real long game. You know, people go to our events, many of them have used a shovel for the first time in their lives. And so hopefully people come away from the events and they might think, hey, it's cool to volunteer. And then they'd be more likely to volunteer. Or, hey, it's cool to plant a tree. Or, you know, I planted 20 camas bulbs today, and I learned that that was the major food source for the indigenous people who are still here, living here, still using camas. Even though most of us think they're disappeared. So hopefully people learn things like that. And so another program, we have the NT and the GS program. Another one is what could be called a stewardship program. Sometimes we call it that, monitoring. But so we have volunteers we call summer inspectors, and they check on every tree that we plant for the twice, each of the first 2 dry seasons or growing seasons after we plant them. And so many people may know that we live in a summer drought area, like the Mediterranean. There's 5 areas on Earth that have summer drought areas: South Africa, Patagonia, the Mediterranean, the Western US, and I would also add kind of Western Asia to that. But that has different requirements of plants. It creates different plants. And so we're trying to emphasize plants from summer drought areas. Today I saw the most beautiful red maple I've ever seen in my life. It's thriving and doing good. The red maples are dying all over Eugene, particularly where I live in South Eugene, where I live where we've built all over wetlands. Everywhere along Amazon Creek and the Flat is a federal wetland that we built on, and the water table is like this far below the surface. And most trees won't thrive there. So that's something that Friends of Trees pioneered, and before so I should also say, Friends of Trees is the current tree organization in a long line of tree groups in Eugene. I started volunteering as a 19-year-old in 1986 for Friends of Eugene's Urban Forest. And after that, many of you know, if you worked in nonprofits, that you have a fearless leader who quickly gets burned out, and they lead the nonprofit in a charge, and then they get burned out, and the nonprofit goes down, then a new leader takes over, and there's this up and down thing that happens. Yeah.
Does Eugene still have an urban forester?
They did, and they decided to reorganize their urban forestry department, where they don't call one person an urban forester, but they think of their team as all urban foresters.
Okay.
And so they have
sorry to interrupt, but
no, that's a great question. They have an urban forestry supervisor, and then they have a lead arborist, and then they have park specialists 1, 2, and 3 is how their hierarchy. And then oh wow, I have the org chart of the city of Eugene on my wall. It's pretty complicated, but above the urban forestry supervisor is the swim team. They're one of two branches of the swim team, which is stormwater, all those stormwater facilities you see around town that displace trees and take enormous amounts of money to maintain, but take the particles of our tires and stuff and process them through the ground. That team and urban forestry combine into what they call the swim team, stormwater and urban forestry. That is one division of the 14 divisions in Public Works. So Public Works has the Public Works Director on the very top of the yard down there at 4200 Roosevelt. And then that breaks into two divisions, Parks and Open Space. And then I don't know what they call the one under Public Works, has the airport, roads, concrete crew, all that kind of stuff. And so there's Matt Rodriguez, the head of Public Works. And then the head of Parks and Open Space is Craig Carnegie. There's 7 divisions under Craig, and there's 7, well, Parks and Open Space is under Matt. So anyway, there's all these different divisions, but that's how they are currently breaking up the urban forestry team.
Okay, that sounds good, because I don't want to be calling the city and going, who's the urban forester, and have them laugh me.
Yeah, so the best thing is to call the 682-4800 number that gets you to the front desk at the Public Works yard if you have any kind of question about any of those 14 divisions. But if you're calling about urban forestry and say, I'd like to talk to someone about urban forestry, and they'll put you through probably to a guy named Matt Rivers, who deals with the public on a lot of things.
I have a question.
Yeah.
You're talking about the fact that we become so ignorant about our own whole ecosystem. I was wondering if there's kind of an education piece of what you do. Do you use middle school and high school students in planting trees?
They are welcome to come to our events. They often come to our events. My kid started coming when he was 1.5, and now he's a senior in high school and is a team leader. But we have no funding to work in schools. We really want to work in schools. My opinion is that as people, if you follow the money in our society, it goes to old people and away from children. And so really, I don't believe we really care about children that much in our society. We don't show that with our investment, for sure. And so one example of that is our old urban forester for City of Eugene, back when that was a title, was hired about a year ago as State of Oregon Urban and Community Forester. Super amazing, talented person. So I'm excited that Scott Altenhoff has that role. But before he left Eugene, he did a canopy analysis, which I did the first one in Eugene about 15 years ago, because we couldn't tell, which neighborhood had more tree cover, and City of Eugene was never willing to invest in a simple one. So I just stayed up really late at night and worked for a couple months and did the first one using Forest Service open source software. I'm getting to schools in this story. Sometimes my stories take a while, but so I found that Bethel had 7% canopy cover, Train Song had 7%, and then the Doug Fir South Hills that are populated by wealthier people have 60 to 80% canopy cover. And so just like someone said earlier, we're a suburban city with much less difference in canopy cover than big urban cities even, but we still have big differences. And so like many of you might have seen pictures of Baltimore from space, and you can't see any of the houses in the wealthy neighborhoods because there's so many trees. And in the poor neighborhoods, you can see just like vacant lots, and because there's almost no trees, it's like 3% canopy cover to 50. And Portland has a lot of that. And but typically I did that canopy cover analysis by neighborhood, by Eugene's neighborhoods, and then city of Springfield, because they don't have designated neighborhoods. And, but Scott did it in another way that's really useful to think about, which is by use type. So it's light residential, heavy residential, commercial, industrial, but he added in schools. And he compared all the different ways that we use land in the cities. And guess which use type had the lowest amount of trees of any other use types? And so all these vulnerable kids are going out onto playgrounds with no tree cover to shade them. And despite the fact that trees are shown to increase concentration of children, to reduce ADHD, to increase learning, to improve test scores, there was the first randomized controlled study, which was really hard to do with trees because of the ash issue, in cities back east where emerald ash borers come in and in a really short period of time killed every ash tree. Some of the cities back east, 80% of their trees were ash. So it just annihilated the entire forest. And so they could do before and after, and then they could compare different treatment neighborhoods through time. And they were able to find that, a variable that controls a lot of health outcomes is birth weight. And birth weight just went down when the canopy cover went down. So trees provide an amazing amount of things for kids. And I've spent 20 years trying to get trees on 4J, Bethel, and Springfield school districts. And it's a very, very hard thing to do. Had almost no success. And yeah.
Is that because of the sense that we need to deal with needs? Is it people concerned about maintenance? So people concerned about maintenance?
That I would say that's enough. That's the number one. There's many concerns, but I would say that's number one. Typically, I'll interact with the school maintenance supervisor, Daniel Temple, 4J. I just Schuyler for Bethel, and they just replaced the one in Springfield. I'm forgetting their name, but they all say, hey, y'all, when you pass the property tax limitation measure, whatever that was, 20, 25 years ago, we went from 100 maintenance staff to 20. And so they don't want, if that's a tree, they don't want to go around it when they're mowing. They're like, I gotta get my mowing done. And so every school district hits 99.9% of the trees on their property with their mowers and string trimmers. They smash into them and damage them. And that's because the maintenance supervisors aren't willing to train them to not hit them, which is totally doable. City of Eugene used to do that. They train their staff now to hit less than 3% of their trees. So 99%, 3%, you know.
I'm having trouble picturing that as a training. Can you just say it in the training?
Yes.
And well, I mean, it's complicated if you're a staff person, and a lot of them are really well-intentioned. Another thing is that as part of our disconnection with, I would say reality, but we've created a super special, the definition of industrialism is mass production and division of labor. Part of that division of labor in our industrial society is that the people who are in charge of what goes out of school are these people called landscape architects who live in a box in Portland somewhere and come up with a design that tells us what we get at our school, like the stuff at River Road when they just redid that, the ridiculous choices that Cameron, McCarthy, Gilbert, and Shivey made for Roosevelt Middle School. And I just drove by Camas Ridge and they were planting picos and Leland cypresses on, in heavy clay. Really bizarre. And that's just the way it is, but maintenance is the main thing, is they don't feel like they don't want to clean leaves out of bark mulch. is what it really comes down to.
They don't
So-
wanna steer their mower.
They don't wanna leave. And, you know, and I don't blame, I don't wanna make it sound like I'm blaming them because it's like, we would have to, like, if we invested as people and we sit, and, you know, if all of us. Really, if like 20 people say something to the city, they usually change, you know, there isn't that many people who, in my experience, who care or do anything. I've never been able to get a group of 5 people organized around tree advocacy in the city of Eugene. So, I think that people really need, if people really cared and they really wanted stuff, stuff would happen. Sorry, it's been a long day, so I don't mean to be negative, I'm actually a pretty positive guy, yes.
No, I think you're positive. What kind of big canopy tree do you recommend?
I am a huge fan of oak trees. And I am, in the nursery that I'm working on starting, it's, oak trees. You know, we used to say we're supposed to be like Sacramento in 2050 with climate change. Now we're supposed to say Fresno or Modesto. I'm not ready to say Bakersfield. No offense against Bakersfield, but, it's pretty hot in the summer. And, so I'm trying to think of trees that will survive a climate change future with a minimum of chemical or water or human time inputs. And so ideally, after 3 to 5 years of watering an establishment, getting something going, you could turn it loose and it would live 200 to, if it's a sequoia, 2,000 years in that site without needing anything, just providing benefits. And so I'm a big fan of oak trees. And just to list some of our native trees, madrone is spectacular. There's a beautiful grove of madrones as you drop down Chambers Overpass to the Public Works yard on the right. And you'll see them blooming with the white flowers in the spring. And right now they're covered in berries that are edible and delicious. Oaks, madrones, valley ponderosa pine is a phenomenal tree. It probably does better than any other tree around here. Incense cedar is a really good one. And kind of conventional shade trees, like right now, tulip trees. I don't think they'll be drought tolerant enough in our future, but they're just so beautiful right now because they're yellow orange, and it's the biggest tree of the Appalachians. And those and sycamores get bigger than any other tree back east. And they both do really well in our really drained soils here.
Have you had much luck growing madrones? Because I've tried and
Me too.
I've heard
Me too.
they're really hard to get established.
I just did all day extension service workshop in Roseburg on madrones.
Like, yeah,
My whole team, it was so fun and exciting. I learned that some trees have 19 different fungal foliar diseases at the same time, and they look good. And then a whole bunch of other pests and pathogens, but I have about a 30 to 40% survival rate. And right out here in Santa Clara, I rent land and I'm growing trees off kind of where River Loop 1 and 2 come together and Delay Road at Eugene Wholesale Nursery, and by Delta Sand and Gravel. Delta or Eugene? Delta Sand and Gravel.
Yeah.
And so I have madrones growing out there, but they're growing in the ground, and I have to transplant them to a pot, grow them for a year before I can give them away or sell them, and probably 2/3 will die when I do that. I'm in an organization called the Arbutus Army. Arbutus is madrone. Army is a play on people joining together to do something. But ARME is how you designate botanical plants. AR for Arbutus, Menziesii. And so that group is working on figuring out how to grow madrones. One theory is I call the kombucha theory. And so is to create a mother, because madrones go back 50 million years in the fossil record. And that long ago, they developed relationships with some of the earliest ericoid mycorrhizal fungi. And so, so they have these really complex soil relationships with fungi and other organisms. And so my theory is that if we could dig up some of that and then create a mother in compost and add a little bit to the soil, then we might have a better survival rate. And so I'm gonna experiment with that, even though at the drone workshop, there was a bunch of strong sounding criticisms of that idea. And a really fascinating discussion on what we all need to think about is the concept of assisted migration or managed movement, as it's coming to be called. But you know, trees can only run so fast, and they're trying to run north really hard and fast, and jays and squirrels can help them. But other than that, they can't move that fast. And so a lot of them are just gonna die, go extinct. I expect most of our forests in Western Oregon to burn up in the next 20 years. And so there's gonna be a lot of change, and how do we wanna participate in helping with that and trying to create the forests for our cities and our rural areas of the future?
When does a bush become a tree?
Most definitions say 10 feet. A tree
Okay,
is something 10 feet and greater.
okay, because we have some wonderful aronia, and it is 25 feet tall.
Wow, I've
It is
never seen it over
wonderful.
8 feet.
Oh, it is between us and the neighbor. Harvest is prodigious.
Wow.
And, you know, because it bends over, you know, kids can play underneath it, but the lower branches are kind of mostly bare and you can clean it out, so playhouses and stuff. So possibly something for schools, you know?
I think it's a great thing.
I mean, we're
when I
trying
think
to
of-
think for that, because we have private schools that we work with. And
Oh,
we've got-
cool.
Yeah, send all your grandkids and kids to our schools because they have huge trees, okay? But, yeah, no, we keep trying to think about, we'll, you know, build a bill in certain spaces, you know?
I
Some
like-
people say no trees, you put in a bush. Oh, oops, I didn't know it's gonna get that big. Oh, well,
Many people don't know that Homeland Security made a national rule that on all public properties, all shrubs had to be removed. Because they're seen as the places where terrorists or bad guys hide out in. And so our Lane County Fairgrounds was affected by that. They went through and tried to eliminate all their shrubs. And many federal buildings, you don't realize, but they actually tried to follow. You could just ignore that law. Or I don't know if it's a law or some kind of ruling or a guideline, but many institutions around the country went and removed all their shrubs. And you'll see many schools in the Eugene Springfield area have done that. And I think all plants have benefits. I'm really interested in culturally important foods. And so the nursery that I am starting works on growing a lot of those. So oaks, camas, most of our native lilies were important food plants like tiger lily and rice root, frularias, calcorduses, rhodias, and all those different things. And for the plant breeder geeks in the room, Luther Burbank, who made the potato, the Burbank potato that's still used by McDonald's, lived in Santa Rosa in the 1910s and 20s and tried to create, he believed that camas could surpass the potato as an important food source. The problem, one, is that the bulbs are pretty small. Two, it takes 5 years to get to a decent sized bulb. And so he started doing plant breeding, crossed the Rocky Mountain camas with our grape camas, and created a softball sized bulb within a few years of breeding. So, and had already cut years off the time to maturation, was working with our brodias and our fritillarias, and then when he died, it was all lost. And no one's cared enough to do that kind of research since then. but there's huge potential in our cultural foods. I went and volunteered on the largest, acorns as food operation in the world, last year, using industrial methods to produce food. And, thank you. Oh, yeah, there's huge potential for, foods from our native foods. Questions? Yeah, go ahead.
My question was on, back going to the maintenance, and maintenance being a major problem for a lot of people with trees. And I just planted a ground transplant one, so
Oh,
I'm kind of starting to find that it's probably not gonna work out. But we've had a couple of limbs fall pretty close to the house, so I've tried to keep most of our trees pretty well trimmed up. And we've got a pretty tall Doug fir, and hired an arborist to come out, and then had someone come out and do the trimming that they recommended. And it was a pretty tall bill that most of my neighbors pointed out that they don't have to pay, and how great for them and how crappy for me. Is there any programs or anything like that can at least recommend on the intervals? Or because anytime you hire an arborist, you're probably gonna say, oh yeah, we should climb that. We should definitely take those 4 limbs out at the very top and then make it expensive for you. Is there any places that you can go to spend the trees do that, or any groups?
That's a really good question. The kind of guru of pruning in the US is down at Florida State named Ed Gilman. And Ed's website has incredible videos on pruning that could walk you through doing some of it yourself. The biggest thing is if you could prune a tree at 3, 5, 8, 12, and 15 years, what's that, 6 times, it may never need pruning ever again. It'll have a beautiful, strong form. And studies have shown that young tree pruning is the most cost-effective return on investment thing to do in our horticulture. So those times, so we just had Friends of Trees has a volunteer pruning program. And we had 6 events this year. Our last one was last Saturday here in Santa Clara. We met at Bramblewood Park, if anyone knows where that is. Actually, that's in River Road.
Yeah.
But 2 of our 5 teams went to Santa Clara, and my team was off over in those neighborhoods. I was totally disoriented, and but everything grows so good here because you have better soil, you have just incredible river deposits. And over by Lone Oak, there was 7 elm. Don't plant elms if you live out here, because they'll grow so fast that they'll just break into bits. So the one thing you can do is choose slower growing trees. And then you can look at, so it's kind of on the front end. I'm not being very helpful to your question, but young tree pruning and then choosing the trees. So red maples, the #1 tree in Eugene, has steep branch angles. The strongest branch angle is 30 degrees. Red maples are in this, silver maples. Those branch angles, they're pushing against each other down here. And so that's where trees break in storms. And so you can look at trees that have strong branch angles. Slow growing trees, it's not true with every tree. So sycamores are an exception in that they're a relatively fast growing tree, but they have strong wood. Most fast growing trees, like elms or birches, grow fast and fall apart. And so if you have slow growing trees, or even medium growing trees like our Oregon white oak, they tend to have stronger branch angles, but then you have to worry when they get big about sudden summer limb drop. So I like to say that trees are like us. We all have pros and cons. And so when I talk about trees to people, there was a book about puppies that I loved one time, and it talked about all the breeds and all the problems. German Shepherds have all kinds of hip problems, and Dalmatians go deaf, all the different things. And trees are like that too. All of us are like that. And so I try and talk to people and say, hey, this is great for this. And like right now, crepe myrtles are people are gaga over them, and they're being planted. Saw a bunch in Santa Clara the other night. And they grow fast, they have beautiful flowers, they can be good for pollinators at certain times. They're all transported up from California and they bring diseases and pests. It burns more fossil fuels to get them here, and they're brittle and they fall apart in the storms. But they grow back really fast at storms. But they send up lots of suckers, but they're so pretty, you know, and so it's kind of like that with all trees, but really the basics, the initial choice. I don't know of any kind of help to answer that question. We have a volunteer pruning program where you know people can learn to prune. It's really fun. You just go out. It was me and one other person on Saturday, and we pruned 16 young trees in Santa Clara, and those trees are way less likely to break now.
I don't think anybody wants to volunteer to climb to the top of that Doug Burke.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
So, given that trees absorb carbon dioxide and give off oxygen, and we are suffering from way too much carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, I guess I keep scratching my head about why we aren't talking more about just freaking planting a lot more trees everywhere. Like, yes, we do a lot of other things. We need to stop driving our cars so much and all the things we know we need to do better. And I'm just not seeing a drumbeat for just planting, to use a technical term, a crap ton more trees. But is it the maintenance issue? Like, why are we not talking about that? Do you have a sense of that?
That's a great question. I just a little while ago went to a presentation from the vegetation manager for Lane County.
Yes.
And who is in charge of the vegetation in Santa Clara. And because of this agreement with City of Eugene. And he said 95% of the calls about trees that he gets are for tree removals and 5% are to plant. And so that's who we are. Part of that though is that Lane County serves rural areas more. And he said there's enormous fear of fire. And rightly, because of genocide of indigenous people who managed the area well and kept fire
Suppressed.
Well,
they burn the Willamette Valley every year for 9,000 years, and you know, we didn't have many trees. Not many people know that prairies are better for taking carbon out of the air, deep rooted in native grasses than trees. And trees are technically a wash in terms of carbon, and because they let off the same amount of carbon that they take in as they break down or burn up. And so the way they can be a net carbon importer is if we make them, you know, like cornucopia in Springfield is made of a tree that fell, their tables are made of a tree that fell down in Eugene, made from a tree. And so we can lock up the carbon in ways like that. And then the way that prairies are able to pump carbon out of the atmosphere is that in the Midwest, the roots go down 10, 20 feet. And then the fine root hairs, there's oxygen down there enough, and the fine root hairs break down, and it doesn't go up and into the atmosphere, it's held down there. And so that's how the carbon is taken out of the air in prairies. They're held up while they're alive in trees. But what if all our conifer forests burn up in the next 30 years? You know, so I think that planting some trees like redwoods and sequoias, they take in carbon faster than any tree. And I just read a proposal to move redwoods in an assisted migration up from, I just visited the northern, what's used to be considered the northernmost redwood stand in the Chetco, just north of the California border. Now we know that there's little stands all the way up to the sites, but that are survived us. But in that, a lot of reforestation now, people are planting redwoods instead of Doug fir to make more money. I think they're mostly gonna die of drought when they get to a certain height. The ones that are in the lower Cascades and the eastern Coast Range, but in the western Coast Range where they have 100 inches of rain, 60 to 100 from Florence to the top of the Coast Range. I think redwoods would do phenomenal. And Seattle, for example, has this program where they're planting redwoods and sequoias all over Puget Sound. And partly for that reason. And so there's some trees that are really good at that. Oaks are really good. So trees that are fire resistant, like oaks or ponderosa pine, that, you know, when Santa Rosa burned, city burned and the oak trees stood. You know, so on the other hand, when I was visited the Talent Fire down between Medford and Ashland, and the cottonwood willow riparian forest burned to a crisp. That fire, and along with 29 mobile home parks, that, like the entire mobile home park, I could put the remains in a pile this big. It was, the fires that we're gonna be seeing are gonna be really impressive. So it's really complicated. I'm not sure that the trees are the answer for climate change. I failed as a tree person in that answer.
What's a good solution for riparian ecosystems for?
Our native Oregon white oak.
Yeah.
No, trees, we have two native
That's
oaks.
top of my list, and we're stewarding Howland Landing County Park.
Yeah,
Yeah, and so, we're Santa Clara Community Foundation.
yeah, I moved that out there.
Oh, yeah, that's right, that was,
Yeah.
so, yeah, I needed Oregon white oak, so.
Go to Eugene Wholesale Nursery right here in your neighborhood, and they have, they've been working for years, and unfortunately, this is their last year before they quit. So.
Or they quit this year, or.
This is their last year. They have beautiful work. They used to, whenever we push for Oregon white oaks, they go, God damn brush. And they didn't want to grow it, but then we pushed them to grow it. We offered to buy a certain amount, and we started buying them, and they started growing. And they got into the problem of how, because you know they can sprawl off and or be slow growing, but they learned how to grow them to fit our conventional viewpoints of what a tree should be. And so they got them to grow straight and look kind of triangular and symmetrical is what humans often like. And now they grow phenomenal high quality ones. So one of the things I'm trying to do is match provenance with planting location. And so provenance is where the seed source comes from. If you go to a nursery now and say, what's the provenance of this? Most nurserymen will laugh at you and have no idea. And that's where we're at. We gave up on that. Those guys out there know, because all their Oregon white oaks are collected from 2 trees and grown from acorns. And so right here in Santa Clara, you have a treasure. We're saying, don't quit, you guys. But they are, but I just looked at 5 rows this afternoon. They're beautiful Oregon white oaks. And get them before Washington Department of Transportation does. They came, Salem Department of Transportation came down and bought 20 this morning. And WDOT came down 3 years ago and they bought every Oregon white oak at every nursery in the Willamette Valley, planting them along roadsides in Washington State. So the native tree thing is starting to kick into gear among institutions that have rules that they have to plant certain portions of them. And then among like little niche people in big cities. But in Eugene, Springfield, I wouldn't say there's many people who are that interested in native plants. There's kind of niche groups. There's the Native Plant Society and some people in the hardy plant growers and other groups. But I'm doing something which is bringing in California native oaks. And so we now have our West University neighborhood and South University neighborhood, blue oaks, valley oaks, interior live oaks, coast live oak, canyon live oak. blue oak, scrub oak hybrids. And so, I was just talking to the most knowledgeable forester in the state at that Madrone conference. This guy, I would say, David Shaw, and extension forester, the guy's amazingly knowledgeable. And we're talking, I said, well, what could I be harming by bringing these trees up from the south? And he rattled off some things that I'd never thought of. You know, that blue oak can hybridize with Oregon white oak, and it could lower its disease resistance. You know, there's all these different things. One thing many of y'all may not know is that, you know, we're in the Pleistocene, and we had 40 times where we had glaciations or ice ages, and then there are 60 to 100,000 year long cold periods with a 10,000 year period between. We're at the end of the Holocene, and so without climate change, our the last 4,000 to 5,000 years, temperature was slowly going down towards another ice age, and that's what would have happened without us. And because we have a north-south coast range, north-south inland valleys, north-south Cascades and Sierras from South Central California all the way up to BC, these two giant floras or groups of vegetation, the California floristic province and the Vancouveria floristic province, which is kind of northern trees, northern plants, and California are like southern plants, chaparral and things like that. Every time we have that 10,000 year warm period, it would move north really fast. And when we have the 40 to 100,000 year cold period, the Vancouveria one would push south. And so we think during the last warm period, the Eemian, 110 to 120,000 years ago, the California floristic province, which is now centered around Redding, California, moved all the way up to South Central Washington State. So the trees that are around Redding, California now were that far north. And so they were hybridizing with our native Oregon white. So I feel like, you know, the greatest risk when you do something with nature is irreversible change. And so if you do something that nature's already doing or done, theoretically, you might reduce that risk.
So do you also use black oak?
California black oak is something that we're planting. I have 100 of them out there that I'll pot them up this month and then grow them in a pot one year. And next year I'll have over 100 to sell locally. And they're collected illegally from Stewart Park in West Eugene.
Stewart Park?
There's two giant California black oaks there.
Beautiful land.
Yeah. Yeah, so I've been collecting acorns, and there's a graveyard, Perkins Point, along Fern Ridge has a bunch of really nice California black. Should I stop?
I think we need to stop for the people who wanna go home, but if you wanna talk to people out front, Eric? More power to
As you can tell, I'll happily talk all the time. But if you wanna get a tree, friendsofTrees.org will help you get a street or yard tree.
I planned with you about 20 years ago.
Doing okay?
It's similar on that. It's beautiful. Oh, I love it. It must be beautiful.